The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped into the hotel lobby with the weight of the day still clinging to my shoulders like a heavy coat I couldn't quite shake off. It was nearly 11 p.m. and the corporate conference I'd been attending had run longer than expected. Endless presentations about market analytics and quarterly projections that had left my mind feeling foggy and disconnected. All I wanted was to collapse onto the pristine white sheets of my room upstairs, order room service, and forget about the morning's early flight back to Chicago. The lobby stretched before me in all its understated elegance, bathed in the warm golden glow of crystal chandeliers that cast intricate shadows across the polished marble floors. The space was vast but somehow intimate, with clusters of burgundy leather armchairs arranged around low tables topped with artful arrangements of white orchids. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of wood polish and something else, something clean and expensive that spoke of five-star luxury. Most of the guests had already retreated to their rooms for the night, leaving behind only the soft murmur of late-night conversations from the bar area and the gentle hum of classical music playing through hidden speakers. Or at least that's what I thought I was hearing. But as I made my way toward the bank of elevators, my footsteps echoing softly against the marble, I realized the music wasn't coming from the sound system at all. It was live, organic, flowing through the space with a kind of raw intimacy that made me pause mid-step. Piano notes, soft and deliberate, each one placed with careful intention. I turned toward the sound, my gaze sweeping across the lobby until I found its source. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a cluster of towering potted palms, sat a grand piano, a beautiful black Steinway that gleamed under the ambient lighting. And there, seated on the bench with his back partially turned to me, was a man I hadn't noticed when I'd first walked in. He was playing, his head bowed slightly in concentration, dark hair falling forward to obscure his profile. From where I stood, I could see the elegant line of his shoulders beneath a crisp white dress shirt, the fabric wrinkled slightly from what must have been a long evening. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that moved with fluid precision as his fingers danced across the keys. The melody he was playing wasn't anything I recognized. Not classical, not contemporary, but something that seemed to exist in the space between genres. It was haunting and beautiful, with a melancholic undertone that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Each note seemed to hang in the air for just a moment longer than necessary, creating a sense of longing that I felt deep in my bones. I should have kept walking, should have pressed the elevator button and disappeared upstairs to the safety and solitude of my room. Instead, I found myself frozen in place, suddenly self-conscious about the sound of my own breathing. The pianist's posture was relaxed but focused, his body swaying almost imperceptibly with the rhythm of the music. There was something deeply personal about the way he played, as if he were having a private conversation with the instrument, sharing secrets that only the two of them could understand. It didn't feel like a performance, it felt like eavesdropping on something sacred. I pulled my phone from my pocket, pretending to check messages while I continued to listen. The screen illuminated my face in the dim lobby, but I wasn't reading anything. I was completely absorbed in the music, in the way it seemed to wrap around me like silk, warm and encompassing. The melody shifted, becoming more complex, and I watched as his left hand moved to the lower keys, adding a deep, resonant bass line that made the hairs on my arms stand up. His fingers seemed to know where to go before his conscious mind did, moving with a kind of muscle memory that spoke of years of practice, of countless hours spent perfecting his craft. There was something mesmerizing about watching him play, the way his wrists moved with fluid grace, never tense or rigid, the gentle arch of his fingers as they pressed into the keys, coaxing out notes that seemed to shimmer in the air before dissolving into silence. His touch was confident but tender, commanding yet respectful of the instrument's voice. I found myself studying his hands with an intensity that surprised me. They were elegant hands, long fingers, well-manicured nails, a thin silver ring on his right pinky that caught the light when he moved. There was a small scar across his left knuckle, barely visible in the dim lighting, and I wondered absently what story it might tell. The music continued to flow, and I realized I had been standing there for several minutes, completely lost in the sound. A few other guests moved through the lobby, a couple heading to the elevator, a businessman in a rumpled suit making his way to the bar. But none of them seemed to notice the piano music, or if they did, they were too preoccupied with their own concerns to stop and listen. That made it feel even more intimate somehow, as if the music were meant just for me, as if he were playing just for me. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through my chest, and I had to remind myself that I didn't even know this man's name. He was probably just the hotel's evening entertainment, doing his job, playing background music for guests who were too busy to truly hear it. There was nothing personal about it. Nothing meant specifically for the tired conference attendee standing awkwardly by the elevators with his phone in his hand. But then the melody changed again, becoming softer, more contemplative, and something about the shift made me look up from my phone screen. That's when I saw him glance in my direction. Our eyes met for just a moment, a brief electric connection that made my breath catch in my throat. He had dark eyes, I noticed, framed by thick lashes that any woman would envy. His face was angular but soft, with high cheekbones and a mouth that quirked slightly upward at the corners. He was younger than I had expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of understated attractiveness that grew more compelling the longer you looked. He offered me a faint smile, shy, almost apologetic, as if he were embarrassed to have been caught looking. Then his gaze returned to the keys, and his fingers continued their intricate dance across the black and white expanse. But something had changed in the music. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could hear it. The melody had taken on a different quality, more personal somehow, as if that brief moment of eye contact had shifted something between us. I didn't even know the song, I thought, watching as his fingers moved with renewed purpose. But I knew I wanted it to never end. The realization hit me like a gentle punch to the solar plexus. I wanted to keep listening, not just to the music, but to him. I wanted to understand the story his fingers were telling, to decode the emotion behind each carefully placed note. There was something about his presence, about the way he inhabited the space around the piano, that drew me in like gravity. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and began to move closer, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs scattered across the marble floor. There was a seating area near the piano, several overstuffed armchairs arranged around a low coffee table where someone had left behind a copy of the Financial Times and a half-empty coffee cup. I chose the chair that was closest to the piano but still far enough away to maintain the illusion of casual distance. As I settled into the plush leather, I noticed a paperback novel tucked into the side pocket, some thriller with a lurid cover that a previous guest must have forgotten. I pulled it out and opened it randomly, holding it at an angle that would allow me to watch the pianist over the top of the pages. He didn't acknowledge my presence directly, but I noticed that his posture straightened slightly, his shoulders pulling back just a fraction. The music continued to flow, but there was a new consciousness to it, a subtle awareness that made every note feel intentional. The piece he was playing now was different from what I'd heard before, slower, more introspective. It reminded me of rain against windows, of quiet Sunday mornings, of all those small moments of solitude that could feel either peaceful or lonely depending on your state of mind. Tonight, wrapped in the warm ambience of the hotel lobby with this stranger's music washing over me, it felt like peace. I tried to focus on the book in my hands, scanning the pages without really reading, but my attention kept drifting back to the pianist. From this closer vantage point, I could see more details. The way his left foot worked the sustain pedal, adding depth and resonance to the lower notes. The slight furrow of concentration between his eyebrows when he reached a particularly complex passage. The way his breathing seemed to sync with the rhythm of the music, as if his entire body were part of the instrument. There was something almost meditative about watching him play. His movements were economical but expressive, never flashy or showy, always in service to the music itself. It was clear that he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply lost in the act of creation, of translating whatever emotions lived inside him into something tangible and beautiful. A middle-aged woman in an expensive-looking coat passed through the lobby, her high heels clicking against the marble as she made her way toward the front desk. As she passed the piano, she paused, reaching into her purse to pull out a few bills that she dropped into what I now noticed was a small glass jar, positioned on top of the instrument, partially hidden behind a small arrangement of white roses. The soft rustle of paper money hitting the bottom of the jar broke the spell momentarily, and the pianist looked up, offering the woman a polite nod of thanks. She smiled back and continued on her way, but the brief interruption had shifted something in the atmosphere. The music paused for just a moment, and in that silence I could hear the ambient sounds of the hotel. The distant murmur of the bar, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft whoosh of the revolving door as someone entered from the street. Then his fingers found the keys again and the music resumed, but with a different energy. It was as if the small act of acknowledgement from the passing guest had reminded him that he was performing, that there were people listening, judging, appreciating. The melody became more structured, more deliberately beautiful, though no less heartfelt. I found myself wondering about his story. Was this his regular gig, playing evening sets in hotel lobbies? Was he a conservatory graduate working his way up through the ranks of the music world? Or perhaps a composer, testing out new material on unsuspecting hotel guests? There was something about the way he approached the instrument that suggested deep training, serious study. This wasn't just a talented amateur. This was someone who understood music on a fundamental level. The piece he was playing now had a sense of building towards something, the individual notes, weaving together into complex harmonies that made my chest feel tight with emotion I couldn't quite name. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost painful, like looking at a sunset that was too brilliant for your eyes to take in all at once. I realized I was gripping the paperback novel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. I forced myself to relax, to settle back into the leather chair and let the music wash over me without trying to analyze it or understand it. Sometimes the most profound experiences were the ones that couldn't be dissected or explained. The lobby around us had grown even quieter as the evening deepened. The bartender in the adjacent lounge was beginning to clean glasses and put away bottles, preparing for the end of his shift. A security guard made his rounds, his footsteps echoing softly as he checked doors and surveyed the empty spaces. But here in this corner with the piano and the soft golden light, time seemed suspended. The pianist's music had become even more intimate now, the notes flowing together like water, each phrase building on the last to create something that felt almost like a conversation. I had the strange sense that he was aware of me listening, that somehow my presence was influencing the direction of the music, steering it toward something more personal and immediate. His hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence, finding melodies within melodies, creating layers of sound that seemed impossible for just 10 fingers to produce. There was a passage where his right hand played a delicate, ascending line, while his left maintained a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm, and the combination made me close my eyes and just listen. When I opened them again, he was looking directly at me. This time he didn't look away. His fingers continued to move across the keys, but his gaze held mine for several long seconds, and I felt something shift in the air between us. A recognition, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building through the music. His eyes were even more beautiful up close, dark brown with flecks of gold that caught the light from the chandeliers. There was intelligence there and sensitivity and something else that I couldn't quite identify, but that made my pulse quicken unexpectedly. The music was changing again, becoming slower, softer, more deliberate. Each note seemed to hang in the air longer now, creating space for contemplation, for the kind of quiet intimacy that can exist between strangers who share a moment of unexpected beauty. I wanted to say something to acknowledge what was happening between us, but I couldn't find the words. How do you tell someone that their music has stopped you in your tracks? How do you explain that you've been standing in a hotel lobby for 20 minutes because you can't bear the thought of walking away? Instead, I just listened, letting the music speak for both of us. The piece was reaching its conclusion now. I could sense it in the way the melodies were resolving, in the gradual slowing of tempo. Part of me wanted to get up and leave before it ended, to preserve this moment in amber, to avoid the awkwardness of what might come after the final note faded away, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by his hands, by the way they seemed to caress the keys with such tenderness, by the expression of complete absorption on his face. This was what passion looked like, I realized. Not the dramatic Hollywood version, but this quiet, intense dedication to beauty, to craft, to the act of creating something meaningful in a world that often seemed to have forgotten the value of such things. The final phrase of the piece was heartbreakingly beautiful, a series of notes that seemed to climb toward the ceiling before dissolving into silence. His hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in his lap, and for a moment The lobby was perfectly still. Then he turned on the bench to face me directly, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "That one was for you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly across the small distance between us. The words hit me like a physical force, warm and unexpected. I opened my mouth to respond, to thank him or ask his name or say something, anything that might extend this moment, but before I could find my voice, the lights in the lobby dimmed slightly, signaling the end of the evening's entertainment. He stood from the piano bench, gathering what looked like sheet music from the top of the instrument, his movements graceful and unhurried. In the soft, golden glow of the lobby lights, he looked almost ethereal, like something from a dream that I might wake up tomorrow and convince myself I had imagined. But the music had been real. The way it had made me feel had been real, and those words, "That one was for you," would echo in my mind long after he disappeared into the elevator, leaving me alone with the silence and the lingering warmth of something that felt like the beginning of everything. Part 2. The words hung in the air between us like a question I didn't know how to answer. "That one was for you." My mouth opened slightly, then closed again, and I felt heat creep up my neck as I struggled to find an appropriate response. Should I laugh? Thank him? Ask him why? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. I started, then stopped, my voice catching in my throat. The book I'd been pretending to read slipped from my fingers and landed softly on the carpet beside my chair. "Thank you," I finally managed, though the words felt inadequate for what I was feeling. He smiled then, a real smile this time, not the shy, apologetic expression from before. It transformed his entire face, softening the angular lines and making his dark eyes crinkle at the corners. "You look like you needed to hear something beautiful tonight," he said simply, as if that explained everything. There was something in his voice, a gentle warmth that suggested he understood the weight of long days and empty hotel rooms, the way travel could make you feel disconnected from yourself and everyone around you. I wanted to ask how he could possibly know that, how he had seen something in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself. Instead, I found myself saying, "It was beautiful. I mean, it really was. I don't know much about music, but that was..." I trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the piano, feeling foolish for my inability to articulate what the music had done to me. "You don't need to know about music to feel it," he said, beginning to close the piano's lid with careful, practiced movements. "That's what makes it universal, I think. It speaks to something deeper than knowledge." I watched him gather his sheet music, noting the way his fingers handled the papers with the same reverence he'd had shown the piano keys. "Do you play here every night?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Maybe I was just trying to keep him talking, to extend this strange suspended moment a little longer. "Most nights," he replied, straightening up and turning to face me fully. "The management likes having live music in the evenings, and I like having a place to play. It's a good arrangement." He paused, considering something. Though I have to admit I often stay later than I'm supposed to after the crowds thin out. That's when the songs feel truest, you know? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I did know. There was something in his expression that suggested layers of meaning I was only beginning to understand. "What do you mean by that?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the piano as if the answer might be found in its polished black surface. When there are people around, talking and laughing and clinking glasses, the music becomes background. It has to be pleasant, unobtrusive. But when it's quiet like this, he gestured to the empty lobby around us. When it's just me and the piano and maybe one person who's really listening, I can play what I actually feel instead of what people expect to hear. The honesty in his words caught me off guard. There was something vulnerable about the admission, something that made me want to offer my own truth in return. Your music reminded me of something tonight, I said, surprising myself. I can't quite explain what, but it felt familiar somehow, like a memory I'd forgotten I had. His eyebrows raised slightly, interest flickering in his dark eyes. What kind of memory? I struggled to put it into words. Maybe not a specific memory, but a feeling, like being a child and lying in bed while your parents had friends over downstairs, listening to their voices and laughter through the floorboards. Safe but separate, present but apart. He nodded slowly and I could see understanding dawn in his expression. That's exactly what I was trying to capture, he said softly. That sense of being on the edge of things, watching life happen from a distance. The recognition that passed between us in that moment felt profound, as if we had discovered we spoke the same secret language. I had the strange sensation that this conversation, this entire evening, had been inevitable somehow, that all the conference meetings and delayed flights and mundane details that had led me to this lobby at this exact moment had been orchestrated by some benevolent force of the universe. We fell into silence then, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty, charged with possibility. The lobby around us seemed to hold its breath, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur from the bar creating a gentle backdrop to our wordless communication. I found myself studying his face in the golden light, noting the slight stubble along his jawline, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the thoughtful expression that seemed to be his default setting. There was something timeless about his features, as if he could have been sitting at pianos in hotel lobbies for decades, creating these moments of unexpected connection with strangers who needed to hear something beautiful. Would you, he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Would you like to hear something else? I mean, if you're not in a hurry to get upstairs? I should have been tired. I had an early flight and tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges and obligations, but the thought of returning to my empty hotel room, of ending this encounter and going back to being just another business traveler in an anonymous hotel felt impossible. I'd like that, I said, settling back into the leather chair. Very much. He moved back to the piano bench, lifting the lid once more. Is there anything specific you'd like to hear? Any song that means something to you? The question caught me off guard. I realized I had no idea how to ask for more without sounding like I was asking for too much. What I wanted was to hear him play anything, everything, to extend this moment indefinitely, but I couldn't say that to a stranger, could I? I don't really have a specific song in mind, I admitted. Maybe something that means something to you? He smiled at that, his fingers already finding their place on the keys. I think I know just the thing. What came next was different from what I'd heard before, more intimate somehow, if that were even possible. It began with a simple melody in his right hand, just a few notes that seemed to float in the air like dandelion seeds on a summer breeze. His left hand joined in with a gentle accompaniment, creating a foundation that was both grounding and ethereal. I watched as he closed his eyes, his face taking on an expression of complete absorption. This wasn't just playing, this was channeling something directly from his soul through his fingertips. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, with unexpected turns that kept me completely captivated. It had the quality of a lullaby, but with an underlying complexity that spoke to adult experiences, adult longings. "What is this song?" I whispered, not wanting to break the spell, but unable to contain my curiosity. "It doesn't have a name," he murmured without opening his eyes or stopping his playing. "I wrote it a few years ago after a particularly difficult time in my life. I've never shared it with anyone before." The weight of that admission settled over me like a blanket. He was sharing something precious with me, something that existed nowhere else in the world except in his memory and in the movement of his fingers across the keys. I felt honored and terrified at the same time, honored that he would trust me with something so personal, and terrified that I might not be worthy of it. The music continued to unfold, each phrase more beautiful than the last. There were moments where the melody climbed toward something that felt like hope, and others where it descended into something that tasted like longing. It was the kind of music that made you remember every person you'd ever loved and almost every dream you'd put aside, every moment of beauty you'd witnessed but couldn't quite hold on to. A hotel staff member passed through the lobby. A young man in the crisp uniform of the night shift, probably making his rounds. He glanced our way as he walked, and I caught something in his expression that looked like understanding, maybe even approval. There was a slight nod, a small smile before he disappeared around the corner toward the elevators. It was as if he recognized what was happening here, this delicate moment of connection between strangers, and wanted to protect it from interruption. When the last notes of the unnamed song faded away, neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence felt sacred, full of everything that had just passed between us. I found myself holding my breath, afraid that any sound might shatter the spell. "That was incredible," I finally whispered. "I can't believe you've never shared it before." He opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I've never had the right audience," he said simply. The implication of his words sent a warm flutter through my chest. Was I the right audience? Had this chance encounter somehow provided the perfect conditions for him to share something he'd kept private for years? "Why tonight?" I asked. "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment, his hands resting motionless on the keys. "I don't know," he said eventually. "Sometimes the universe just aligns in unexpected ways. You looked like someone who would understand." "Understand what?" "That music is about more than entertainment, that it's about connection, about finding the words we don't have for feelings we can't explain." He turned on the bench to face me more directly. "You've been listening, really listening for the past hour. Most people hear background noise. You hear the story." I felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see something in me that I wasn't even aware of myself. "What story do you think I'm hearing?" "The same one I'm telling," he said softly, "about longing and searching and the hope that somewhere out there is someone who gets it, who gets you." The honesty in his words took my breath away. We were strangers, but somehow we had stumbled into the kind of conversation usually reserved for old friends or lovers. There was something about the late hour, the empty lobby, the music that had stripped away our usual defenses and left us raw and honest. I'm David, by the way, I said, realizing we hadn't even exchanged names yet. David Chen. Marcus, he replied, extending his hand. When our fingers touched, I felt a small electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. Marcus Williams. It's nice to meet you, Marcus, I said, and meant it more than I had meant anything in a long time. What brings you to Portland? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Business conference, I replied. Market research for a consulting firm. Not exactly the most exciting work, but it pays the bills. I felt suddenly self-conscious about my mundane profession in the face of his obvious artistry. What about you? Are you from here originally? New York, actually, he said. I came out here for a music residency program a few years ago and ended up staying. The pace is different here, more conducive to actually creating instead of just performing other people's work. Do you compose full time? He laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. I wish. This gig helps pay the rent and I do some private lessons during the day. It's not Carnegie Hall, but it allows me to keep music at the center of my life, which is what matters. There was something admirable about his acceptance of his circumstances, the way he had found meaning and purpose, even if his path hadn't led where he might have originally intended. Do you ever miss New York? Sometimes, he admitted. The energy, the opportunities, the feeling that anything could happen. But I like the person I've become here better than who I was there. In New York, I was always trying to be someone else's version of a musician. Here, I can just be myself. I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. My own life felt increasingly like a performance, playing the role of the successful consultant, while some truer version of myself remained hidden beneath layers of professional obligation and social expectation. What about you? Marcus asked, as if reading my thoughts. Do you feel like yourself in your work? It was a surprisingly intimate question, the kind that usually took months of friendship to earn the right to ask. But something about this entire evening had fast-tracked us past normal social boundaries. Honestly, not really, I said, surprised by my own candor. I fell into consulting because I was good at analyzing data and solving problems, but it doesn't feel like what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching someone else live my life. What would you be doing if you could choose anything? I opened my mouth to give the standard answer, something about finding more meaningful work, maybe in the non-profit sector, but found myself saying something different entirely. I think I'd like to write, I said, the words feeling strange and true at the same time. Not business reports or market analyses, but stories. Real stories about real people and the moments that change everything, Marcus smiled. And it was the warmest expression I'd seen all evening. That sounds perfect for you. How could you possibly know that? Because of the way you've been listening tonight. Writers are listeners first. They pay attention to the details other people miss, to the stories hiding beneath the surface. His words settled into my chest like seeds finding fertile ground. I had never articulated that desire to anyone, had barely admitted it to myself. But hearing it reflected back by this stranger who seemed to see me more clearly than people I'd known for years felt like a kind of revelation. Maybe in another life, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they felt like a cop-out. Why another life? Marcus asked. Why not this one? Before I could answer, he had turned back to the piano, his fingers finding a new melody, something lighter this time. with an undercurrent of possibility that made me sit forward in my chair. It wasn't as complex as the previous pieces, but there was something hopeful about it, something that suggested new beginnings and unexpected adventures. This one doesn't have a name either, he said without stopping his playing, but it's about taking chances, about choosing courage over comfort. I listened to the music and felt something shift inside me, as if his words and the melody had combined to unlock a door I hadn't even realized was closed. The conference, my flight tomorrow morning, my carefully planned life back in Chicago, all of it suddenly seemed less important than this moment, this conversation, this possibility of becoming someone different. Do you ever get scared? I asked, about choosing the uncertain path. Terrified, he admitted, his fingers never faltering on the keys. But I've learned that fear usually points toward the things worth doing. The safe choices don't require courage. We talked for another hour as he played, our conversation weaving in and out of the music like complementary melodies. He told me about the songs he was working on, the way he drew inspiration from overheard conversations and glimpses of strangers' lives. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told in years, about the novel I'd started writing in college and abandoned when real life took over, about the way I sometimes felt like I was living someone else's dreams instead of my own. The lobby around us had grown progressively quieter as the night deepened. The bar had closed and the occasional guest passing through became increasingly rare. It felt as if the entire hotel had fallen asleep around us, leaving us in our own private world of music and conversation. I should probably let you get some sleep, Marcus said eventually, his hands coming to rest on the keys as he glanced at the clock on the wall. It's nearly 2 a.m. I looked at my watch in surprise, unable to believe how much time had passed. It felt like minutes since he'd first said those words. That one was for you, but somehow we had managed to compress what felt like months of getting to know you conversation into a few short hours. I can't believe it's so late, I said, though part of me would have been happy to sit there until sunrise, listening to him play and learning the contours of his thoughts. Time has a way of disappearing when you're doing something that matters, he said, beginning to gather his sheet music once again. I stood up from the leather chair, my body stiff from sitting in one position for so long. The spell was breaking, I could feel it. The magic of this unexpected encounter giving way to the practical realities of schedules and obligations. In a few hours I would be on a plane back to Chicago, and this entire evening would become just a beautiful memory. Thank you, I said, though the words felt insufficient, for the music, for the conversation, for all of it. Thank you for listening, he replied, standing and closing the piano lid with a soft click. Really listening, it made all the difference. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite ready to end the evening. I wanted to ask for his number, to suggest meeting for coffee before my flight, to find some way to carry this connection beyond the confines of this late night encounter. But I couldn't find the words, couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between this magical suspension of normal life and the practical world that waited beyond the hotel's revolving doors. I should head up, I said finally, gesturing toward the elevators. Early flight. Of course, Marcus nodded, tucking his sheet music under his arm. Safe travels. I took a few steps toward the elevators, then turned back. He was still standing by the piano watching me go, and something in his expression made my chest tight. Marcus, I said. Yes. That song you played, the one without a name about taking chances, would you play it again sometime? He smiled, and even from across the lobby I could see the warmth in his dark eyes. I'll be here tomorrow night too, he said, his voice almost too soft to hear but carrying clearly in the stillness of the empty space. If you want to listen. The words hit me like a gentle electric shock. Tomorrow night. Another chance, another conversation, another opportunity to step outside the boundaries of my carefully planned life. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something that would acknowledge the invitation and the hope it represented. But the elevator doors chose that moment to slide open with their familiar chime. A guest emerged, an elderly man in a bathrobe heading toward the vending machines, and the moment of perfect silence was broken. By the time the stranger had passed, Marcus had gathered his things and was walking toward a different elevator, his footsteps soft on the marble floor. I watched him go, memorizing the way he moved, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence even in the empty lobby. Tomorrow night, I said to myself, as the elevator doors closed, carrying me up toward my room and my temporary bed and my morning flight back to a life that suddenly felt too small to contain everything I was feeling. But even as I said it, I knew it was more than just a possibility. It was a promise. To him, to myself, to the person I might become if I found the courage to choose uncertainty over comfort. The elevator climbed steadily upward. But part of me remained in that lobby, in that golden circle of light around the piano, in the space between one song and the next where anything could happen. To be continued,